Hello, my name's Andrew, and today we're doing a first impression review of the Wildling Ranidae, or as it's probably pronounced in Deutschland, Ranidae. So I've been waiting for a Barefoot Rain Boot for years. I keep asking brands to make them and no one listens to me until now. Wildling finally made one and they knocked it out of the park. They did a really good job. But before we talk about what it's like to take it outside, let's just take a look at some of the basic features. So here's the toe box. It's pretty similar to Wildling's other shoes. They've got a nice square design here, lots of room for toe splay. It may not fit someone with extra wide feet, but pretty much everyone else, there's a lot of room here. And it's also got some bend to it. It's not rigid at all, so it'll give you a pretty good amount of room. It runs true to size. I'm usually a 44. The 44 worked for me. I had, maybe about a half a thumbnail extra left over in there for thicker socks. But if you're on the edge of a larger size, you may want to go up if you're planning on using it for winter wear and stacking up socks in there. In terms of the volume, it's pretty good as well. Again, super bendy, so it doesn't limit your foot. And when the boot bends, there's no like weird crimping, it just flows very smoothly. It's also got a good amount of volume up here, but I found that it grabbed onto my foot really well. And one of the reasons for that is that they've sculpted it in the back, so it kind of hugs your heel. And this is a problem with a lot of regular rain boots, is that they feel very clumpy, and they sort of like fall off of your foot unless you're really wearing some super thick socks. So I love this feature. It feels a little bit more like a normal boot that just stays on your foot for longer walks and stuff like that. They've got some really cool imprinting here, just from a design perspective. Got their little wolf logo imprinted on the back. And then they've also got a dip here, which is a nice feature because it allows a little bit more forward and backwards motion if you're going on longer walks and not just doing things like standing around and garden or doing chores, things like that. Inside there's plenty of room, so it's very easy to slip on and off, which makes it great for doing chores or going out to grab the mail, things like that. But I found them to be pretty comfortable for going on an hour-long walk to the grocery store. And part of that is that the tread has a really nice grip to it. It's kind of like halfway in between like a really minimal barefoot shoe or boot like Wildling sells with most of their other styles, and something really thick and clunky like a normal rubber boot. But it's got a ton of really nice flexibility. They've cut all of these different lines into the sole, so that even though in the back where it's more dense for a little more protection, like if you're doing a little bit of shoveling, it can take a bit of a beating. But then, like I said, they've cut all of these lines, so even in the back, where it's more dense, you get some nice bends, in all directions. The front is even a little bit more bendy. They've got some more open portions here, and this really helps with grip, like if you're going up and down hills or you're on really slippery terrain. But then just a ton of really good flex and ground feel as well, because you can feel just little stones and pebbles and things, in between here, but then you get some nice protection from the thicker lugs. If you look closely, you can see that it is a little bit softer rubber, which I like because it feels more comfortable for walking than something thick and stiff. But if you're doing some really intense shoveling where you're working for hours and you're just slamming your foot down on the end of a metal shovel into like hard dirt, this might not be the best option because it is still a barefoot shoe, and I think the rubber could wear down a little bit faster than something with a thick normal sole. Also, obviously, because it's a rain boot and it's like one piece, the waterproofing is excellent. It's completely waterproof. There's nowhere anywhere in this boot where water is going to get through. I was wading through a pond and I could just stand there for hours and there's not going to be any water coming through. Although, like any boot, you have to be aware of how deep you're stepping into the water, because at one point I stepped into a really deep part and the notch here almost got a little water in there. But in addition to the boot itself, Wildling has also made a new 98% merino wool sock. It's virgin wool, so it's extremely soft, doesn't scratch at all. I really like the pattern because it's got some room on top. It's nice and stretchy, so if you want to wear it as a base layer, it works well because of the wool. It smells nice, has a very natural earthy wool smell, and then also undyed, so you're not getting any toxic additives in there. But then on the bottom, it's got a little bit closer knit for more durability. That said, my toes are really close together, so I generally like to wear Injinji wool socks as my base layer. They're not that thick, but they just help spread out my toes and create a little bit of airflow in between there. If I wear a sock like this as my base layer, it can get a little bit sweaty up towards the toes, So I find like wearing these as my base layer and then putting a wool sock like this over top works really well. And I love these compared to Smart Wool. They work so much better because a lot of the new Smart Wools have a lot of synthetic in them. It's honestly really unfortunate because Smart Wool used to be mostly wool, but now they don't breathe quite as well. And I just find pure wool to be a lot warmer. Also, because the Rainy Day or Ranidae is not insulated like any other rain boot, I like to wear some sort of insole on the bottom. This is just a simple wool felt insole, and it pairs really well with a wool sock. Wildling sells insoles like this, and if you want something that's not wool based, they also have vegan options. But then of course the nice thing about having an uninsulated rain boot is that it also works for summer, and because there's a lot of room in here, it creates a decent amount of airflow. It is rubber and it is one piece, so it's not going to breathe as well as something that has, you know, more exposure here on the top, you know, perforation. But overall, it's gonna be really versatile, and it's excellent for the weather right now in Rochester, New York, where it's just sloppy and cold and miserable. If you want something waterproof, it's a little bit more trail oriented, this is the Vivobarefoot Tracker Winter SG. It's a super rugged boot. It's a little bit more structured than the Rainy Day. Also has a wide toe box. Vivo does get a little bit more tapered towards here, so I think I like Wildling's foot shape just a bit more. And it's also got this extra guard here, which is important for waterproofing and durability for doing really rugged, nasty hikes, but it does limit the flexibility and just creates a little bit more stiffness overall. It's got some nice grommets here where you can pull the laces through quickly, but they also hold well. And then some quick lace locks up at the top for getting it on and off easily. Has a similar dip in the back, kind of like Wildling, for some good range of motion. I like the height of this boot because it's tall enough to keep out water and mud and stuff like that when you're hiking in really nasty conditions, but it's not so tall that it limits your range of motion like you can get in a higher cut boot like this, which isn't quite as practical for going on super long walks. Inside has got a pretty thick cotton insulation, so like the name suggests, this is a really good option for winter. It's fairly warm and you can stack up some socks in there, although it is a little bit lower volume than Wildling, and also just doesn't have quite as much flex because the leather upper is really rugged. Underneath, you've got a 7.5 millimeter sole, pretty good amount of flexibility. I like the SG tread because there's more room in between the lugs here, which adds some flexibility versus like the all-terrain sole from Vivobarefoot. It's also excellent in super steep and muddy conditions because it's got that claw-like grip with the triangle lugs going this way for going uphill, grabbing in the front of your foot, and then the opposite direction in the back for going downhill, so you're not slipping. And then they are a little bit closer together. So even though it is a soft ground boot, you can do some rocks and gravel and stuff like that. You just wanna mostly do wet ground, soft ground, because they will wear down faster without having quite as much surface area as some of Vivobarefoot's firm ground soles. If you want something that's halfway in between hiking and casual, this is the Lenka Winter. This is my all-time favorite winter boot for pretty much everything. I use it for some lighter hiking and also for just walking to the grocery store, stuff like that. It's got an extra wide toe box, but I would say it's a little bit closer towards just like a regular wide because there's actually a lot of insulation here. It's merino wool, it's very thick, and it's extremely warm with a couple layers of socks, especially something like Wildling's 98% wool sock. You can get down to 0 degrees, you know, if you have like an Injinji base layer under that. So they're extremely warm, but they're also really flexible. They've got a 8 millimeter sole. So the lugs are pretty beefy and they're pretty deep, but there's a lot of room here. They've cut the lines in the middle, so there's just a ton of flexibility. It's got a very good grip, similar to the Vivobarefoot SG, might be even a little bit better. And one thing I love about it is that the tread kind of curves over instead of just going straight up and down. So when you're on roads, it doesn't put as much wear on it. Like I've had these for more than a year now, and the tread looks excellent, basically brand new, which is unusual for a soft ground tread, which usually breaks down faster. Like the Vivo SG, they've got the tread going in the opposite direction for the back. So again, for steep, slippery hills, it provides some really excellent grip. And the leather is softer than the Vivobarefoot SG, so it provides a little bit more flexibility, which I love. So unless I'm doing some really rugged hiking, you know, where it needs more protection, this is usually my go-to. It's my warmest barefoot boot. I think it's one of my most comfortable winter barefoot boots, and it's mostly waterproof. Although I will say that I've had a tiny bit of separation here where the boot bends, because it's pretty hard to keep that type of glued sole attached there, and probably at some point I'll fix it, but overall it's held together really well. And unless you're like wading through a deep stream or something like that, it does seem to be pretty waterproof. For something more on the casual end, this is the Vivobarefoot Gobi Warmlined. It used to be called the Winterized, but it's basically the same thing. It has a synthetic insulation, but it's very puffy. It's pretty close to wool in terms of breathability because there's so much air in here, so I find it works really well. They're quite warm. I've worn them down to about 10 degrees, sometimes even 0 if I'm walking fast enough, and keeping my blood flowing. Also has a wide toe box. Like I said, good squared off shape towards the tip, but just a little more tapered than I would like here if you're someone who has, extra wide feet. But like the Rainy Day, it has a lot of flexibility, so it'll fan out even a little bit wider than how the boot looks. It's got a stitched sole, which is great for durability, and the waterproofing of the leather is excellent. You can treat it with wax like any other leather material, and it's not completely waterproof, but it can handle pretty much anything that casual would, throw at you, like semi-shallow puddles. The rubber wraps around pretty high, which helps with that. And again, like I said, the leather is really water resistant. In terms of the sole, it's 3.7 millimeters. So this is the thinnest one we've looked at. It's very similar to some of Wildling's other shoes, which are 3.5 millimeters. So excellent ground feel. You've got a little bit of grip here, but if you're on slippery terrain, you definitely want to be careful. But overall, I find this boot to be incredibly comfortable for like walking around cities. I can walk around in this thing all day without getting any foot pain or fatigue, so I really love them. And then finally, if you want a vegan casual option, this is the Vivobarefoot Gobi Hiber. This is essentially the same thing as the Warmlined in terms of fit and the height and the sole and everything, but it's just got a vegan upper. It's a little less waterproof. I find that it can let water in, especially over the top, but it does have some good protection up around here. So as long as you're not going through super deep puddles, or if it's raining quite heavy, then pretty much everything else is fine. Although I do love that you can slip into it because it's got bungee laces as opposed to regular ones, although you could put them on the Warmlined if you wanted to. But yeah, a lot of times I'll grab these just because it's so easy to slip in. All right, so that's my first impression review of the Wildling Rainy Day or Ranidae, and I'll let you guys know how it goes in the long-term review. But in the meantime, if you'd like to support the channel, you can shop with the referral links down below, browse and filter more products with the shoe finder tool at my website, barefootwear.org, or watch my zero drop transition video to learn more about barefooting. Finally, if you have a question about Wildling's new Barefoot Rain Boots or about barefoot shoes in general, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, catch you next time. Peace.